hall meeting. We are gathered here today down at the SunTrust building to hear from Congressman Matt Gaetz. He represents the 1st Congressional District. That's us. And we will be, for the next hour and a half, talking about issues that are important, not just to our area, but probably to the entire nation as a whole. I host the morning show. We also have, helping to facilitate tonight's activities, the host of Pensacola Speaks and the owner of the independent news, that would be Richard Alson. Rick, thank you for being here.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Don.
And actually, what some of you don't know is that we are impinging on Pensacola Speaks time.
Actually, this is my show, and you're the guest.
That's true.
Right.
All right, just to repeat what we're going to do tonight, we will take your questions by phone, which will then be relayed to us, though you won't hear that. We will be happy to have you ask questions directly when we get to that section of it. We will be hearing from our congressperson here momentarily as well. We will go straight through until 6:30. The facilities, as I pointed out, down the hall to the right there, your left. As we continue, I'd also like to point out that my boss is here, Jackie Rinker with Cumulus Media. Jackie, raise your hand so that they can see who else to complain to besides me. All right, thank you very much. Congressman Matt Gaetz is in his first term as a congressperson for the 1st Congressional District of the state of Florida. He is with the firm of Gaetz & Gaetz, is the way I like to think of it. He certainly comes by it honestly. His father was a state senator and started out, I guess, as Okaloosa County school superintendent. Did he come off the school board first?
He did.
He did. And he spent many years in the legislature. He is in an emeritus sort of status now, having been term limited out. As I said, we will be here for the next 90 minutes, and you will have the opportunity to be participating yourself. But without further ado, please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome our Congressman, Matt Gaetz.
Thank you to Don and Rick, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to be on Pensacola Speaks a number of times. I think this is the 4th or 5th gathering we've had in Escambia County where folks have been able to ask questions and express concerns and give thoughts and ideas. And Rick, I just think it's a great thing for democracy when people take their own time to come out, share their values and their views. And in the first 11 months I've been in Congress, I've had a chance to go all over the world to visit our troops, to analyze the value of our military installations. And I'm struck at how special it is that here in the United States, the sign of a vibrant democracy is the ability of people to be able to exchange ideas and criticisms directly with their elected leaders. I got a lot of colleagues in Congress, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, who are doing a lot less of this. They're doing telephone-based town hall meetings instead of in-person interactions with folks, and that's just not my style. I think that folks that are my bosses here in Northwest Florida have a right to show up whether they agree with me or disagree with me. And I really look forward to a robust discussion tonight. Nothing's off the record. There'll be no question that I won't give my best effort at answering. If there's additional information that I don't have from a statistical standpoint, certainly we'd love to make sure that the folks here present or on the phone let us know how we can get back in touch with you. I've got a few members of my staff here tonight, and we want to be as thorough and responsive as possible. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the questions.
So in other words, we've got Matt Unchained here for tonight. You get an opportunity to ask some questions. I think to sort of feed it a little bit, what I'd like to do in the beginning, maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes of tonight, is let's focus on a couple of topics. If you've got questions related to that topic, ask them, and then we can move to it. But I promise you, there'll be a whole an open season on Matt a little bit later in the discussion. Don't worry about Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz can handle himself.
He's got a gun.
He's not on him. But let's start with tax reform and talk about the budget, Matt. In October, you were one of the only Republicans to vote against the Senate budget plan. This last week, you voted for tax reform. Explain the difference in those two votes.
Sure. I did not get my way in terms of the process of advancing tax reform. I used to be the Finance and Tax Chairman here in the state of Florida, and I found that our process was a lot more bipartisan, and it was a lot more fiscally responsible. You see, here in Florida, we can't cut taxes to go in deficit spend. If we want to cut taxes, that has to be a consequence of enhanced revenue to the government, or we have to go and cut spending and prioritize tax cuts over other potential utilizations of those dollars. In Washington, there is a system that has been set up, in my opinion, to avoid accountability and avoid having to make some of those zero-sum decisions. So I'm a member of the Budget Committee, and I took that responsibility very seriously, and I helped draft a conservative budget that cut, at a minimum, $200 billion in spending. Now, how did we make those cuts? We wrote a plan that said that able-bodied, childless adults, so not senior citizens, not children, not people who are disabled, but able-bodied, childless adults would have to go to work or volunteer at a nonprofit in order to earn benefits. I thought that would be economically productive for people. So we passed that budget and sent it over to the Senate. They, instead of accepting those reforms, sent us a budget back that was a license to do $1.5 trillion in deficit spending. And that's not something I agree with. I don't think that is a fiscally responsible way to budget. And so I voted no. I voted against the Republican leadership, against a majority of the Republicans, because I believe that if we really wanted to cut taxes, the right approach is to identify some areas where we could cut spending. I lost that fight. So then we move on to tax cuts. And the fundamental question, Rick, is whether or not we should hold the taxpayer hostage for Washington's desire to be fiscally responsible on spending. I didn't think we should hold the taxpayer hostage. I voted for tax cuts. And what I'm really encouraged by is that on Thursday, when President Trump came and visited with the Republican members of Congress, he made a commitment. Speaker Ryan agreed that the very next thing on the agenda will be the types of welfare reforms that I referenced to be able to cut spending. So I'm not happy that we did these things sequentially. I would have done them at the same time. But I fundamentally believe that we have a tax code today that is broken. We don't need a 70,000-page tax code. We're going to end up with a simpler system that lowers rates for all Americans. And I look forward to seeing that unlock the potential of this economy, move the economy forward, but then I will be one of the loudest voices in Congress to come back and ensure we do the appropriate spending cuts that don't drive us into generational theft.
Do we have a question? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just a second. Let's get you up to the mic.
$250 have been eliminated. Second, taxpayers from states like California will not be able to deduct their state income tax. My folks live in California. They will be affected, and your vote will impact them as well. Explain to us why. I was in Washington, D.C. I just came from Washington, D.C. last week and talked to the Deputy Secretary of Education regarding the Florida plan for ESSA that does not comply with the regulations of ESSA, and much more on that $250. I would like for you to champion that cause to revive that tax deduction for teachers, because we spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars for our classroom. It is disgusting that the House and the Senate would vote for that. Please, I beg of you to take that cause. $250, that's a drop in the bucket, for heaven's sake. So those are my two concerns for tax reform. And not only that, tacking in the elimination of health care mandate for individuals, wherein my son had a change in life situation, was able to enroll in ACA with much lower tax than he would, health care than he was paying before. So I am not convinced that when you, the Republicans, say that health care ACA is dead, is not true. So I would like for you to explain to me in 3 ways how you're going to find the way to restore those issues that I have talked to you about.
I will attempt to make my answer shorter than the question. So I identified 3 issues there, Rick. The teacher deduction, the California system of having high property taxes and then deducting those, and then the individual mandate issue. I'd like to begin with the issue of the deduction of state and local taxes. I will absolutely fight to end a system where Florida taxpayers are subsidizing high-tax states in New York, California, New Jersey, and Illinois. It is totally inequitable, and it's not fair. It's not fair for my constituents to be subsidizing decisions that other state legislatures make to raise the taxes on their citizens. Here's what happens now. Right now, we have the lowest per capita state taxes in America in the state of Florida, the lowest. And I'm incredibly proud of that. I was the finance and tax chairman that championed billions of dollars in tax cuts. So when in New York and California, they're able to take some big deduction for their state and local taxes, well then we're paying more of our fair share as a consequence. I want to send the message from Washington that low tax states win. That'll start with the state of Florida winning. Maybe some more folks from California and Illinois and New York will choose to come to Florida, and I think that'll be ultimately better for the economy, and it's more equitable and more fair. Now to the teacher deduction. There are a variety of very popular deductions at this level. A couple $100, a couple $1,000. And what that means is that most Americans now are having to go to some accountant, some tax service system, and pay a tremendous amount of money to go and find each of these individual deductions. So the organizing principle of the Republican tax plan is get rid of a lot of these loopholes, get rid of a lot of these deductions, and then you can lower rates for all Americans. Here's how this will specifically help teachers. Many teachers, because we don't pay teachers enough in this country, in my opinion, many teachers are not in the high income brackets. And so teachers will get one of the greatest benefits from doubling the standard deduction. We take that standard deduction, double it, that will be a way bigger tax break than teachers get by going and deducting a measly $250. And by the way, you're going to be able to fill out your taxes on a postcard. 9 out of every 10 Americans will be able to easily and simply fill out their taxes on a postcard, avoid compliance costs, and at the end, that will lead to a lower burden for all Americans. Final issue, the individual mandate. I absolutely believe we should repeal the individual mandate. I believe we should repeal Obamacare altogether. And if the United States Senate is willing to send over legislation that repeals the individual mandate, I will absolutely vote for it.
Okay. Well, let's give a couple others a chance. We'll come back, I promise. All right. Tax reform. All right, yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know. Lisa Rawson. I want to know your thoughts, Congressman, about graduate education and tax reform. They're talking about taxing people in fellowship programs, getting PhDs on tuition waivers, which is going to make it impossible for people to pursue higher education. It seems like it's a war on our smartest and brightest kids in these programs.
Citizen academics.
The best thing we can do for any graduate from college is to have a vibrant, robust economy where people can get a job. Right now what happens is that you've got an entire generation of millennials who are graduating tens of thousands of dollars in debt with skills that are not leverageable in today's economy. And so we've got a generation of debtors moving back in with their parents who are either unemployed or underemployed. So to me, at the 10,000 foot view, the most important thing we can do is to create conditions for economic growth. This economy has been growing at 1.8, 1.9% during the 8 years when Barack Obama was president. Just in the last quarter, we increased that GDP growth to 3% just with the expectation of tax cuts. Now that growth will go away if we don't fulfill the promise and get the job done. But I believe that taking economic growth and increasing it, GDP growth by 50% is absolutely the best thing we can do for folks. Also, in that first job people get out of college, I know, I've had them, you really aren't in a high income bracket. You're getting that first job at maybe $28,000 a year to, $35,000 a year. And for those folks, they're going to benefit the most from a tax system where the standard deduction is doubled. So rather than having to go in and individually check off, well, the student loan deduction, well, this type of deduction, that deduction, folks will be able to have a simple system, far more easy to understand, doubling the standard deduction, that will lower rates for people that have the salary range of those entry-level jobs. That's how I think this tax code works for folks that are graduate.
She asked you about graduate, the PhD students, citizen academics.
When they get
research,
taxed on stuff, there goes our
cancer.
research, there goes all our best and brightest programs. That's our technology, our STEM, everything.
Well, we actually had higher education before it was tax deductible, and we'll have it after it's tax deductible. The key question is affordability. And look, there's a lot we can do on the affordability of higher education. I've worked in a bipartisan way to try to get rid of some of the cost centers in higher education that make the tuition and fees so high. But the theory that it's more valuable to have an individual deduction for PhD students than to have an overall economy that is healthy and growing, unlike the economy we've had under Barack Obama's presidency, I think is very short-sighted. I think that you miss the forest for the trees if you're more interested in one individual deduction than the overall health of the economy and the quality
times
of
how
jobs
many
that graduates
people are
can get.
taking, times how many people are taking that deduction,
All right, question.
Two questions.
which lessens their burden.
Just step over here. I'm not aligned here.
Two quick questions regarding tax reform and housing. Yeah, I know you are aware of where the realtors stand on this, but locally, what I want to know is the change on the going over the 5 to 8 rule. Have the same primary residence 5 out of 8 years in order to not pay capital gains. In a military community such as we are here, that's going to have a huge impact in our service members that are here 3 to 4 years. These guys are going to become more renters than they are home buyers. It's going to affect our local economy and the state as far as the taxes that they collect on every time a property sells. In addition to that, the same thing with all the snowbirds that we have, the elimination of second home deductions. Thank you.
Yeah, again, I would say, the overall metric that impacts the quality of the housing economy and the real estate economy is whether or not the economy is doing well. We remember what it was like in 2004, 2005 when the economy was booming. It didn't matter what deductions were available or not available. We had a lot of activity. And then during the downturn of 2007, 2008, it didn't matter what deductions were available or not available. We were not moving Florida through new home construction and through resale. On the issue of kind of the 5 to 8 change, I agree that's something that as this process moves forward, I would like to see us continue to address. I don't think that the soup is fully cooked on that issue, and I would agree with your concern. At a minimum, I think it would be appropriate to have a discussion about waivers for military families, because I think that's a unique challenge that people go through, and so I think your point is very well founded. On the second home issue, I think personally, we got to get a little more data on the extent to which that really becomes a driver of the overall market. Here in Northwest Florida, it absolutely does, but I think we can have more data at the national level on that. Ultimately, I'm very glad that we got a $10,000 deduction back in this legislation for property taxes, and that also can apply to second homes. So for those second home buyers you're talking about, they will get the benefit of lower rates. They will also get the benefit of a $10,000 deduction for local property taxes. It's not unlimited, so that we don't subsidize New York and California, but it's, I think, appropriately tailored for Florida.
Any more questions on the budget?
You keep speaking about doubling the deduction here and cutting this and cutting that, but you haven't said anything about reducing spending. And we've got a lot of revenue coming in, and if you cut your spending, you don't have to do a whole lot but I haven't heard you say a thing about cutting spending. All you've said is we're going to double this deduction and cut here and cut there seems to be the mantra of the Republican Party, and yet we haven't heard much about spending.
Well, I don't know.
Interrupt just one second. I don't want to fight with you over the microphone. The reason I'm going to control it is because I can hear what you sound like. So if you're over driving it, I just want to let you know that I'm not trying to take possession of it, but I need to manage the microphone because I can hear what you're sounding like, which is what goes on there. Sorry, go ahead, Don.
Sure, sir, I don't know if you were taking a comfort break at the opening of the show, but the very first words I said on the program were about the need to cut spending. I said in response to Rick's first question that my great disappointment in this tax bill is that it did not occur simultaneous to spending reductions. And I don't think it's okay for Republicans or anyone else to just say we should do less spending. I think you actually have to have a plan that you will stand behind with actual data that shows where you would cut spending and how that would impact people's quality of life. I have a plan. I advanced it in the House budget. It was included in the House budget. My plan is to make sure that able-bodied, childless adults have to go to work or volunteer with a local government, with a nonprofit, in order to obtain benefits. And if you conditioned benefits on the ability of able-bodied childless adults to work or volunteer, the CBO score, not me, but the Congressional Budget Office score, is that you would save $400 billion during the budget window. That's my plan to cut spending, and I'll fight for it every day that I'm in Congress.
Lady back here. For our listeners out there in the audience, on the radio, we are Pensacola Speaks on News Talk 1370 WCOA. We're broadcasting live for the Student Community Institute building, the old SunTrust building, Spring and Garden Street. We've got a packed house, standing room only, baby in stroller. And we're talking about right at this moment, Congressman Matt Gaetz is answering questions about tax reform in the budget.
First, is it in the budget that was passed, the removal of the deduction for medical expenses exceeding 10%, that was taken out, right?
That was in the tax bill.
That it's no longer going to be a deduction that people can take, correct? So you have all these seniors who are on Medicaid and have paid into it for their entire lives that have between $2,000 and $8,000 then that they're not going to be able to claim deductions on because that's gone. And these are people who set money aside, counting on the fact that they have their retirement money or their pensions, which usually get broken down as companies go out of business and their benefits get taken away. And so now, in addition to all of that, they're also going to have to pay extra because they can't deduct medical expenses that Medicaid doesn't cover. Because the average senior citizen or disabled American pays between $2,000 and $8,000 a year on expenses that are not covered by Medicaid. So you just didn't feel that was important, that especially given how aged this community is because of the military being here, that wasn't something that you should fight for.
No, I have a different view. I think that we've engineered the way that we allow people to utilize the tax code to meet medical needs incorrectly. Here's what I would do, here's what I voted for, and here's what we've sent to the Senate. An expansion of health savings accounts. I think that if during someone's working years, they have the ability to put away money into health savings accounts, that ought to occur tax-free. Now, Obamacare actually penalized health savings accounts. It made it harder to put money away tax-free, and that made it harder for seniors that ultimately had to spend money on medical expenses. So up on the front end, you allow Americans to plan to put funds into health savings accounts. I think then you have a pool of resources tax-free that you can use. The difference is whether or not you want to be in charge of your own money, your own account, or whether you want to put the folks in Washington in charge. I'd rather American citizens have the ability to control their own destiny and to be able to use health savings accounts. I do believe that seniors and everyone will be better off when we ultimately lower rates for all Americans. I suspect that during the course of the tax debate that's gone on and will continue to go on, there'll be a variety of these popular deductions, whether it's a few bucks here for education, a few bucks here for classroom purchases, a few bucks here for medical expenses. That's the broken system. That's the 70,000-page tax code for you. I believe that we ought to have clear, easy rates to understand, not have to go through and itemize, and then have lower rates for everyone on those very pension plans, on that retirement income, and I think that'll be easier for folks to comply with.
I have one quick rebuttal, I'm sorry. What do you propose then you do?
Wait.
Sorry. What do you propose then can be done in order to grandfather people in who are already disabled, already within the system, already retired, that were born before, 1950, so that they're not all of a sudden stuck with all of this cost that they weren't able to budget for their entire lives. Because I have so many parents, step-parents, grandparents, that all of a sudden are faced with all these costs, and it's like, what do we do?
Yeah, no, actually, I think that's a reasonable suggestion to say that if there's a way to do a phase-in of different parts of the tax plan, particularly in those areas where you can't sort of go back in time, I think that's a very reasonable suggestion.
Let's have, I will do one more question on.
I got one over here.
Or on the budget, and I want to move to health care. We can come back to the budget after
this
that.
sort of cuts across both of the questions. But wouldn't it seem that you're not really taking something from anybody if you were able to get Congress to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it's absolutely insane, and frankly, it's a special interest giveaway to Big Pharma, right? Any other system that is this big would go and negotiate prices. But Big Pharma doesn't want that to happen because they want to have the benefit of their high prices. And I have been involved with some members of Congress on pharmaceutical reform. Another idea I have, that would go to this very issue of pharmacy prices is I think we ought to look at the billions of dollars that pharmaceutical companies spend on advertising. I mean, when I hear Big Pharma executives testifying before my antitrust subcommittee and judiciary, they talk all about their research and development costs. But I think a lot of these high prices of pharmaceuticals are driven by the advertising, and there may be a role for the federal government there as well. But I completely agree with you, and I would totally support negotiating prices, not only, within Medicaid programs, within states, but also for Medicare.
So why don't we?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So why doesn't it happen?
Well, sir, I've been there for 11 months. I support that concept, but in this crazy system our founders have thought of, it takes 218 members of the House, 60 in the Senate, and the President to sign it.
All right, we're through the first third of the town hall. There are a couple more topics I want to cover, then I promise you, the last 30 minutes is open for everybody to do rebuttals and come back. Healthcare. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation estimates that about 97,000 people, adults, in your district are uninsured. Escambia, Okaloosa, Santa Rosa counties. Under the ACA plan, we've got about 30,500 that are enrolled in the basic plan. Meanwhile, Escambia is out of 67 counties, Escambia ranks 55th in health outcomes. What's your replacement plan for ACA?
4 things. First, block grant Medicaid to the states. Right now, we have a Medicaid system that is totally broken because you have a federal government dictating to states how they have to run it. In this federalist system that we should have 50 laboratories of democracy, all working on ways to optimize their Medicaid program with work requirements, with technology, with telemedicine, and by having mid-level providers engage in more primary health care. But we have no system right now to be able to do that. Second thing we've got to be able to do, we have to be able to buy insurance across state lines. Here in this community, there is only one option for enrollment in the ACA system. It's Florida Blue. And when there's only one option, they hold all the cards. And there's no ability for citizens to be able to go and negotiate over those things that they would want in their plan or out of their plan. So I want to go to a cafeteria-style system with health insurance that is similar to what we have in auto insurance or life insurance or disability insurance, where you can pick and choose the coverage you want for the needs that you have. Next thing I would do, I would get rid of the current antitrust exemptions that health insurance companies have. It's ludicrous to me that health insurance companies are allowed to violate antitrust laws that you wouldn't allow other regulated industries to be able to violate. And so they're able to essentially negotiate with each other on price so that they don't have to negotiate with the people on price. This was a provision put into law in the 1930s for health insurance companies because Congress thought these poor health insurance companies, they need all the extra protection that they can get. Well, now they're major multinational companies, and I think they ought to have to play by the same rules as everyone else. That would lower prices. Final thing I would do, expand health savings accounts. I would make sure that people, and we talked about that earlier, could put more of their money away. So those are the 4 things that I think we could immediately do to lower the cost of health care in the individual market. You spoke about enrollees in Obamacare, Rick. In my district, it's the lowest Obamacare enrollment in the entire state of Florida, probably because a lot of my constituents are on TRICARE, but it's the lowest enrollment in the entire state. But ultimately, it's killed the individual market because people that want to go out into the individual market are facing premium increases that range from like 28% upwards of 400%. So I want to see an empowered consumer, not an empowered government. And by the way, those 4 things I just mentioned, I have voted for every single one of them. The House of Representatives has passed every single one of them, and the United States Senate hasn't even taken a vote on them individually. And I think that's a problem.
All right. Matt, what's your position on pre-existing conditions? Right. For a lot of people who have gotten coverage under ACA that may Maybe they're in the middle of cancer treatment. Maybe they're in the middle of, they've had a major surgery. What's your position on pre-existing conditions?
Well, people with pre-existing conditions, and by the way, in my family, look, I mean, my mother's been in a wheelchair for the last 32 years. I know what it's like when you have someone vulnerable in the house. Now, fortunately, my family's able to take care of my mother, but there's not a day that goes by when we're talking about health care that I don't wonder what would happen to my mom if there was no safety net. So I believe in a safety net. I believe the best thing we could do for chronic pre-existing conditions, people that need dialysis multiple times a week, people who need chemotherapy treatment, very expensive stuff. I think if we had a Medicaid program that actually worked for people who are truly impoverished and truly ill, it would go a long way, because today the Medicaid system is totally broken. So that's the first thing we could do, is to have an effective safety net that we don't have now, because we don't have devolution of authority to the states. But look, I think that you've got to ensure, and it may require some federal guidance, some federal regulation, that you don't have price gouging for people that may have some latent condition or some presenting condition. Here's what we can't do. We can't move to a system where you say, no matter what has happened to you, no matter what your condition is, we're going to give everybody the same price every time on health care. Imagine if we did that with auto insurance. And by the way, I think I'm not the type of guy with the best driving record, so I can speak candidly about this. But if you did that with auto insurance, nobody would be insured. Everybody would drive around the road, and then after you got in a car wreck, you could show up to State Farm or Allstate and say, I'm here, my pre-existing condition is the wreck I had this morning, and I'd like you to insure that risk. So that just won't work as much as we might want it to. That's a utopian environment we can't live in. So again, a better safety net, some federal guidance on pre-existing conditions, but ultimately, I think that the states innovating will be the best solution, not an overarching federal system.
Questions on health care?
First, he's done that car thing before. He's got a line.
I get home back as for now.
First, I would like to say that I feel insulted that you will say that the tax code is difficult to understand. My first language is not English. However, I can understand all of these books and be able to understand, and I do not want to fill out my income tax in a postcard. Second, I actually have two suggestions for you, Representative Gaetz. The suggestion in the deduction for health care is that if we remove that cap of 7.5% of your gross income before you can make any tax deduction on health care, that would help us a lot. We cannot make any deductions on health care before that 7.5% cap is met. That would help us a lot. Instead, probably, say you can deduct $10,000 or $15,000 of your medical expenses, and that would help our taxes. Second, I thought this is a democratic process. It is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. My suggestion is, it is not just your plan that would work, but if you get together a coalition of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and whoever, because you are the representative of all the people right this week. Not your plan as a Republican, because that's what you're espousing, but as a plan that would work for the people, by the people, and of the people in this democratic state. Thank you.
I'll start with the concept of bipartisan health care reform, and I'm absolutely certain that that can and does work, because I've seen it work in the state of Florida. It seems to me to be very counterintuitive to focus exclusively on health insurance rather than on the cost of health care. If you focus always on insurance and not the things that make health care expensive, you're sort of always chasing the rabbit down the rabbit hole. Here's what we did in Florida to make the cost of care lower. We went and empowered mid-level providers. We found out that some nurse practitioners and physician's assistants were actually in the very same classes with medical doctors. when it came to prescribing some of the narcotics that are typically used in primary health care. But in Florida, they weren't allowed to practice to the full extent of their education. So we got a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats together. We fashioned legislation that allowed mid-level providers to do more primary care. We sent it to the governor, he signed it, and it's now the law. And one of my great frustrations with Congress is that that type of problem solving around issues that really have no ideology, I don't even know what the Republican or Democrat side is of that issue. I just think it's a good idea. But around those issues, everything in Washington is driven to division. You know, we don't have bipartisan prayer groups. We got Republican prayer groups, Democrat prayer groups. We don't eat together. We don't spend time together. And in my first 11 months in Congress, it's one of my deepest regrets. Now look, everyone in this room and everyone listening knows I'm a very conservative, libertarian-leaning Republican. But all the time, just on issues like those you raised, I found common cause with Democrats where we could actually advance good solutions for the people. So I'll continue to look for those options. I'll continue to reach across the aisle to Democrats where I think that there is common ground. But we should not confuse working together with the compromise of our ideals and our principles. I don't compromise my fundamental principles, but I will work with people across the aisle to find solutions, particularly in the area of healthcare. To the fact that you're insulted because I want to make the tax code simpler, I think this provides an excellent contrast for voters. If you're a voter out there who thinks that the current 70,000-page tax code is easy, is simple, works for you, that it's exactly what you want and you want no changes to the tax code, I'm probably not the congressman to vote for. If you want the code to be simpler, easier, if you want lower rates, that's what I'll fight for in Congress.
Question back here. For our listeners out there, we are Pensacola Speaks on News Talk 1370 WCOA. I'm Rick Out with Congressman Matt Gaetz. Town hall meeting, we're talking about health care.
Hi, Michelle Ray. I'd like to say your comments you made a little while ago where you were comparing health insurance to car insurance is disingenuous at best. Yeah. It is required by law that you have car insurance.
Thank you.
And you are in control of your car. You're the one that chooses to speed or not speed, to drink or take drugs and then get behind the wheel or not do that. When it comes to health care, you just took away the fact that everybody has to have health care. So now those of us that still have health care are going to be paying more because there's less people in the pot. Also, I don't control whether I have a heart attack. I don't control whether I have rheumatoid arthritis, which I do. I don't control whether I have fibromyalgia. Those are not things that I can do anything about. It's just the hand that I was dealt. So to compare those two things, not a good idea.
Few factual inaccuracies in your comment. First, you actually are required to have both car insurance and health insurance now as a consequence of Obamacare. That's what I want to change. Second, you're not required to have car insurance if you don't choose to drive, right? Car insurance is something you're required to do if you choose to drive. So, the other challenge,
well, let's wait.
Yeah, listen to what that's
We've got time to everybody speak. Let's go.
There are things that people can do to enhance their own wellness. You made the statement, I have no control over whether or not I have a heart attack. I think just about everyone with a medical degree would disagree with that statement because while there are people who do have some genetic heart disease, there are many people who can actually lower the risk of heart attack through wellness. One of the things that Obamacare did was it made it harder for businesses to go and establish wellness programs where people could get more money in their paycheck, where people could get lower premiums as a consequence of either good diet, good exercise, good wellness programs. Quitting smoking is another thing that people can do to lower their risk of heart disease or different types of cancer.
What about the things that
Well, I'm sorry, ma'am. The only examples I can respond to are the ones you provide. So that's what I'm doing. So,
Let's wait. Come on, guys. Everybody's waiting their turn. We'll get everybody in if you have your hand up.
but the fundamental principle I stand by, which is that I wish we could live in a world where every time we got sick, under any conditions, no matter how well we did or didn't take care of us, someone else would pay the bill. That would certainly be the world that Bernie Sanders has offered, and it's a fictitious world. It's not the world we live in. In the world we live in, someone has to pay the bill. And I've proposed a series of free market reforms that would lower the cost of health care, enhance options for consumers, and the worst system we can have is a system where the federal government and not the individual and not the states have the ability to craft solutions that can lead to better wellness and better health care.
You got another hand up. Let's get that. You got it. There you go.
All right. Okay, thank you. All right, Matt, my dad's a doctor. I wasn't aware that you had a medical degree. But anyways, Matt, I wanted to ask you, I have a female health issue that I've had for probably about 4 years. It's not something that I can control. So if what you are proposing, if that were to actually become law, then I would be pretty much, out of luck in the situation because it would be considered a pre-existing condition. It's nothing I can control. So what you're saying is extremely infuriating and insulting. So I wish you would actually consider what your constituents are saying and think about people that are actually dealing with real life issues that they cannot control.
Let me first address the premise that what my constituents are saying is that they want more Obamacare. Rick... Let's test that theory with some data. When I ran for Congress, I was not shy about my opposition to Obamacare. I put in every advertisement that I ran that I would fight with everything I had to repeal Obamacare. And it turned out, Rick, that when the votes were cast in this democratic system we live in, I got about 7 out of 10 of every vote. And so it seems as though if people, let me make it very easy for those here and for those listening on the radio. If what you want is more Obamacare, if what you want is the federal government to run your health care, I don't think you should vote for me. But if you want, fair point. But if what you want is a congressman that will fight every day to repeal Obamacare, I'll be standing for election again.
Take some questions. We got a question? Let's one dude.
My name is Diane Hall, and I live right here in Pensacola, and you have your insurance paid for. You have no idea the cost of medical. Do I look healthy to you? I trust that most people think I am, but I just had a procedure in July, $178,000. How dare you tell people to have a health savings? How can people save for that? That was one night in the hospital, and that did not even include the doctor's bill. I mean, I am ashamed. I can't believe that you have no heart or empathy for the people that you represent. And you have no idea of the cost and the medicines that I take now my whole life. I pay into my insurance my whole entire life. And now I also take 3 different prescriptions. They're $500 a piece every month. You have no idea. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I've exercised, but yet now I have this problem, a heart problem. Man, and you know what? I think that you owe it to your constituents to stand up and do the right thing and give us all the health care that we deserve. It's a right to the citizens of the United
States. You made mention of my health care, and since you mentioned it, I'm happy to address it. I rejected the Congressional Health Plan. I don't take the Congressional Health Plan because I don't think that, I'm sorry, ma'am, I gave you the chance to speak. Now I'd just like the equal opportunity to respond. So I signed up for Obamacare, as did every member of my staff, because I feel like if the citizens of this country have to deal with the problems of Obamacare, members of Congress and their staff should live under the very same system and under the very same rules. And so I just want to make sure you have the facts when you reference to my staff or my personal circumstances. Now, I don't believe that health savings accounts alone would deal with the very specific circumstances you raised. But you referenced this $178,000 bill you got. Someone has to pay that unless the cost of health care goes down. So I hear what you're saying. You'd like someone else to pay for the cost of that health care that you have. That's your right to hold that viewpoint. The reforms that I've advocated for and the reforms that I detailed to this group and to many others would actually take that $178,000 and lower the cost of care. One of the challenges we have now is we don't have enough competition in the healthcare space, and so you're required to go and pay whatever bill people send you. If we had more competition, we'd have lower cost of care, insurance solutions would be a lot easier, and if people could buy insurance across state lines, save their own money to deal with healthcare, if we had a deregulated market where insurance companies wouldn't be able to violate antitrust laws, I think all of those together would yield far better health care than we get now.
All right, let's have one more question on health care, and then we'll move to another subject. Okay? Good. All right. We'll give everybody an open. We are Pensacola Speaks on News Talk 1370 WCOA. And with Congressman Gaetz.
When I lost my job, nobody would let me get insurance. So I got to the ACA, and I have major depression disorder, so technically I have a mental illness. You want to take away my health insurance? You have to let me buy a gun.
Wow.
So I guess first I'll deal with the Second Amendment element of your question. One of the areas where I'm very proud to have worked in a bipartisan way is to ensure that people with mental illnesses don't have ready access to firearms in circumstances where they could be most harmful to people. When I was chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee in the House of Representatives, I worked with a liberal Democrat from Broward County. But we both held the view that people shouldn't get out of mental institutions and run home to their arsenals, that that was bad for law enforcement, bad for public safety, but that was allowed in the state of Florida. So I worked with Representative Barbara Watson. We went and passed legislation to stop that from occurring, to give people due process to be able to demonstrate their mental capability, but until that was demonstrated, people could not run back to their arsenals, and it was common sense reform that Second Amendment advocates supported, and that people who want more gun control supported. You don't see that in the press because the press likes conflict, but I did want you to know that that's something where we've achieved some bipartisan consensus. Now, as it relates to a pre-existing condition, I fundamentally believe that the best way to deal with folks who fall into that safety net, which people who've just been laid off, absolutely meet that criteria. If we had a state Medicaid system that could cover those costs with the lowest cost providers operating at an appropriate level of competency, if we use technology in mental health, I think we could make healthcare less expensive. I mean, one of my big frustrations with the VA in mental health is that they don't use telemedicine. And so you're making veterans drive to appointments. The most expensive time you can have is the time at the VA clinic, where if we had the distribution of iPads and smartphones and we use that, mental health care is one of the easiest places to actually drive down the cost of care. But it's all the federal regulations and the bureaucratic inertia that stops us from innovating. There are a lot of bipartisan solutions, particularly in the area of lowering the cost of mental health care, and I look forward to working on them.
Okay, Matt, this year one of your first pieces of legislation was to abolish EPA. Today it was announced that you're part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, which was a group formed to bring Republicans and Democrats together to work on legislation involving climate control, climate change. Change of opinion?
Absolutely not. I'm an environmentalist. I grew up here on these streets. I've enjoyed the great environment here in Northwest Florida.
That's okay, because Scott Pruitt's going to take it down already.
The EPA has fundamentally, I think that there is a ton of evidence that suggests that the EPA is not effective at protecting our environment. Well, the best evidence comes from the EPA's own Inspector General, who did a report after the Flint, Michigan fiasco, and found out that the EPA had information that the water supply was being poisoned, had the authority to act, knew that they had the authority to act, and did nothing. So I would totally reimagine the EPA, and I would try to design a system where we actually use more technology at the local level. Since we designed the EPA back during the Nixon era, one of the things that's happened is that testing technology has become a lot less expensive, and so we've developed more core competencies on environmental issues at the state and local level. yet we've never updated our federal laws to be able to account for that stronger competency locally. So I think that reflecting that in our laws would be better for the environment. Climate change. This may be out of style with some Republicans, but I tend to follow the science, whether it's on medical cannabis or climate change. I believe the earth is warming. I believe that humans contribute to that warming. And I think that history will judge very harshly those who are climate deniers. And I don't want to be one of them. And so I want to work together with Republicans and Democrats on bipartisan solutions to climate change. And that's what the Climate Solutions Caucus is organized for. 3 organizing principles of the Climate Solutions Caucus. 1, to get Republicans and Democrats around the same table acknowledging the risk that climate change presents. And I acknowledge that risk, and I'm happy to do it with anyone regardless of their party affiliation. Second thing, to block anti-climate legislation. Some of my Republican colleagues try to get legislation blocked, or try to get legislation passed to not allow research into climate change, whether that's at NOAA or NASA or DOD or any of these entities. And so I want to be a part of legislators that don't predetermine the outcomes of research by not allowing research in certain areas that's uncomfortable to certain people. Third principle of the Climate Solutions Caucus is to actually start finding some ways to solve the problem. Now, I don't believe that we're going to regulate our way out of this problem. I think that that has not worked. I think we have to innovate our way into better outcomes and better utilization of energy. And so I want to be a part of that, whether that's leveraging our universities more, whether that's ensuring that NASA and NOAA have the resources to do climate change research, and then also ensuring that there's a path to market for technologies that would allow us to be more energy efficient. Right now, a lot of the regulatory just garbage that we have doesn't allow us to be able to use some of the technologies that would lower people's carbon footprint. So yeah, I'm a part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and I do not believe that the EPA does us any good in protecting the environment. I would totally reimagine it to be more effective.
Okay, we got a question.
So that was actually the one redeemable thing I've ever heard you say in all of the time that we're going to But where are we going to get all this money that you didn't want to afford to us who have health care and mental health issues, but for innovation, right? Where's the money going to come from now? I'm confused because you just talked about how human life wasn't as important as the dollar bill. To this woman who told you about her affliction.
I didn't say that.
She just interrupted you, sir. And now we have all this money for innovation for a whole new program. You are lying to us, as usual. You are talking about pie-in-the-sky things instead of talking about the fact that we are decimating our earth. I understand you don't have children. We do. We are holding you accountable, and we're getting you out. Get him out. Get him out.
Was there a question?
Oh, sure. No, I actually have an answer on where we could fund additional research. 2 ways. First, by cutting spending for people who are able-bodied childless adults who don't go to work, who don't volunteer, and who are on the dole. And so, yeah, the Congressional Budget Office says it would be $400 billion in savings if we made people go to work who are able-bodied childless adults. Man, you cannot use that profanity. We're live on the air. Second thing that will be able to fund innovation. More economic growth. The best thing we can do for this country is to get the economy moving again. Look, in the state of Florida, by having the right tax environment and the right regulatory environment, the big fight we had in the legislature every year was how to spend all of the new money that we weren't expecting, because we had growth. Now, President Obama told us we could never have more than 2% growth, that we had to limp along at 1.8, 1.9% growth. But under President Trump, we've actually seen 3% GDP growth. So that additional economic activity will yield more revenue for the government, and I think that the government has a role to play in ensuring that we've got the right ecosystem for innovation to be able to solve whether it's healthcare challenges, environmental challenges. We ought to have an ecosystem for innovation, and economic growth is the best thing we can do to unlock the potential of America's innovators.
Okay, we got 30 minutes left. We need to allow people who hadn't had a chance to ask a question to ask a question. If you already answered one, let everybody get a chance. And please, they were patient enough to listen to you speak. Be patient enough to let them speak. We got 30 minutes to go. Let's make it the best 30 minutes we can. All right, we got a question here.
Hey, Matt. First of all, there were 7 quarters of above 3% GDP growth under Obama. Will you agree to that?
Well, the melded rate of the economic growth that we had in the Obama economy was 1.8, 1.9%.
Okay. But one of the things that people keep bringing up and asking about is this tuition waiver thing, and you keep dancing around it. Tuition for an in-state college is about $10,000 per year, $35,000 for out-of-state or private colleges. You're trying to make that tuition taxable income for graduate students who are teaching assistants who make less than $10,000 a year. So it will increase their taxes by almost $4,000 a year, over $3,700. And I don't see how that makes any sense whatsoever when you're also talking about how you want innovation and how you want, other programs to grow. And I don't understand also how, if you look back at the 86 tax cuts under Reagan, there were 8 years of wage stagnation after the 86 Reagan cuts. And then you look at the Bush cuts in 2001 and 2003, there was another 4 or 5 years of wage stagnation. Only 1 year was there wage growth. So what you're asking us to do is to believe that this kind of tax cut is going to lead to something other than what has already historically been proven to be true. So I want you to explain to us how this time it's different.
Yeah.
Sure. So three questions there. The first dealt with the cost of higher education deductibility. I guess there's 2 questions, that and then the issue of wage growth and tax cuts. So I'll take them in the order I've asked them. You made the statement that tuition is $10,000 a year. That's not entirely true. In the state of Florida, we actually had an initiative led by Governor Scott to say we should have a degree that a student in the state of Florida should be able to get for $10,000. And that challenge was issued to our higher education partners throughout the state. And there are now a variety of opportunities, including at the University of Florida, where you can get a college degree for $10,000 completely. So that alters your economic analysis by a threshold of 4, because instead of paying $10,000 a year, you're paying $10,000 total. Again, going to the actual cost driver than just being focused on getting someone else to pay for something. Second thing, in your analysis of the increase of taxes on people that can't take that particular deduction, you forget that we're doubling the standard deduction. So those very same people that you're championing, who are teachers, who are first-time job getters out in the economy, who've graduated, they're going to benefit most when you double the standard deduction, because they won't have the compliance costs, they have lower income levels, and so they're going to be able to get the most out of this tax cut. So yeah, they might not have that particular deduction, but overall, they're going to be paying way less in taxes, and ultimately, that'll be what's good for the economy. Now, you also raised the issue of wage growth. I think one of the reasons in today's, the economy in the 80s was very different because you didn't have the same extent of globalization and the same degree to which technology altered the competitive workplace. In the 80s, you were competing largely regionally and to a lesser extent nationally. Now, all of our students are competing globally. Why is that important? Because the United States of America has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. What does that mean? More and more corporate headquarters are leaving the United States and being domesticated overseas. More and more companies that are innovating and creating in the United States of America are actually housing their intellectual property in Ireland because they have a lower corporate tax rate. So when we take our corporate tax rate from one of the highest in the world down to competitive, the middle of the pack, then that gives us the flexibility to be able to have more of that activity occur in the United States of America. That's what leads to wage growth. You didn't have the type of aggressive corporate rate reductions previously that we are contemplating here, and you did not have the same competitive environment in the 80s that you have today. So in today's economy and in today's world, lowering the corporate tax rate, making the tax code simpler, will bring trillions of dollars in not only cash but other assets back to the United States. It will give the economy what we need to get moving again. There'll be more job creation, and then those jobs will actually lead to careers more than what we have now, where too many people are graduating and finding themselves either unemployed or underemployed.
Right. Another question? Right here.
Just a little bit more, right?
Yeah, any question you want.
I want to ask you about the beach bill.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the beach bill. All right, in the House Bill 1452 that you introduced in Congress, the Escambia County Land Savings Act, better known as beach theft bill. If it's not dead, why not? And if it's not dead, are you going to introduce the same bill again? Are you going to bring it up again?
Yeah, the House of Representatives passed this bill prior to my election to the Congress. Congressman Miller passed it prior to his retirement. I took a very similar version to what Mr. Miller had offered that had passed, frankly, without much interest or controversy, and I offered that as well. So the House has passed the bill twice. The Senate has never passed the bill, and so likely I would require the Senate to act first next time. Now, you have incorrectly characterized the bill, and I want the opportunity to explain why. There is nothing in this bill, nothing, that would take one speck of existing sand and deprive a single person's access to it who is currently using it now. It has been inaccurate reporting, primarily by the Pensacola News Journal, but others as well, that would say that people wouldn't be able to use the beach. That is not true. The only thing that we change is the tax structure that yields people on the BJ system, where they are the only people in America paying property taxes on something that they cannot own. Think about that. Our constituents are the only people in America paying property taxes on something they can't own. But so that there's no dispute about the environmental preservation requirements and about public access, I'm now reading from the bill, page 5, beginning on line 18. It's the subsection entitled Preservation. And allow me to read.
No preservation involved. No conservation involved.
Please, let him read.
As a condition of the grant, the authority to convey the non-federal land, the county shall preserve in perpetuity the areas of the non-federal land that as the date of this enactment are dedicated for conservation, preservation, public recreation, and public parking. So all of the preservations that exist now, we absolutely mandate and require that those continue to exist. So that is the standard. This is not limited. And by the way, I have no objection to the preservation standards right now. My only desire, I'm sorry, ma'am, you don't have this is not like, an opportunity to yell back and forth. You have the opportunity to make your point. Everyone here has. I'd just like the opportunity to respond. And I think it's kind of noteworthy that as I'm reading the exact language from the bill that disproves this flawed argument that we're taking the beach away, that you feel so compelled to interrupt. It should make our listeners wonder, why do you not want the people to know what's in the actual bill? Why do you want to just mislabel it? Why do you want to confuse it? It's unfortunate.
All right, you got another question?
You don't need to speak down to
right
people.
here. Red.
I live on the Bargains. I know what you don't know what I live there. Now that you live there.
We've got 20 minutes left. Let's let everybody speak, please.
My name is Deb Alamont. I am the Florida chapter leader for Moms Demand Action, a volunteer. We are a grassroots organization of American mothers who fight for common sense gun laws while protecting your Second Amendment rights. My question is, you and I have discussed this before. So, in the wake of Las Vegas, and in the wake of Southern Texas, are you still interested in schlepping your silencer bill, which allows people to buy silencers without a background check? And are you willing to put Florida in danger by continuing to co-sponsor CCR, which is Concealed Carry Reciprocity, which would make Florida accept the rules of 12 states that have zero requirements for a concealed carry license?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for asking. I absolutely continue to support the legislation that would make concealed carry permits reciprocal among states that have them. I'll continue to fight for that. I absolutely support it. Frankly, I think the Second Amendment should function as someone's permit, and I think the notion that the government leases you your rights back to you is a totally flawed system. These are rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution. Second thing, I absolutely continue to support the Hearing Protection Act. There's a lot of people who engage in sport shooting, and they use it as a hobby to go out and do target shooting, and many of those people end up with chronic hearing loss later in life. And so, yeah, having an opportunity for people to be able to use less of a combustive sound, to be able to protect their hearing, is something I support today, I'll support tomorrow, and I'll support every day I'm in the United States Congress.
So we've got about 15 minutes. We have another question, Don, right here. Go, let's get everyone a chance to ask their question.
This has to do with the fee simple on the bar. I'm new. I've been in Pensacola for 5 years. I grew up in Miami. They ruined Miami Beach by selling off, giving fee simple. The Carolina, Deauville, all these places came in and found blue, and they bumped up shoulder to shoulder and ruined Miami Beach. I do have a question here in that if people are paying the lease payment for the land, and then they pay taxes on any improvement to the land. So it's not really a double taxation the way I understand it. They're paying one for the lease and one for the taxes. What's wrong with that? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because I see another Miami Beach right across that bridge. And don't even worry about the traffic circles. I've seen traffic circles everywhere. They're nothing. They don't help anything. It's the tolls that cause the problems. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I agree with you that we do not want Pensacola Beach or Navarre Beach to turn into Miami Beach. I wouldn't even want them to deal with a lot of the challenges that exist in Destin and in South Florida.
Why wasn't that mentioned in your platform last year?
It is, by the way. So in the legislation that we've offered, there is no change to those existing development restrictions. 100% of the laws that govern what can and cannot be developed on Navarre Beach and Pensacola Beach today are actually local laws. There is no federal restriction on any development that exists there now. All of that is, if no change in the law occurred, that's the existing paradigm for regulation. We don't alter that in any way. So the exact same protections that you have today, under the exact same system that you have today, is required under the provision of the law that I just read on the radio and to all of you who are here. The reason to change it is that there is an inequity when people are having to pay both a lease fee and a property tax bill. And these are the only Americans in the entire country that have to do both of those things. And so the other challenge is that if you just have the lease fee and not the property tax payment, all the money goes to Washington, and then the money isn't here in our schools or our roads because those folks are making a contribution here. So again, I just want the folks on Pensacola Beach and Navarre Beach to get the same treatment that I get in the city limits of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, or that anyone else would get in any other property tax system. I don't think it should be different, but there is nothing in this bill, nothing that authorizes additional development, and there's nothing in this bill that changes who makes the decision on what the development codes are. The only thing that deals with preservation and development and public areas like we've come to enjoy is the mandate that I have in the bill that there can never be fewer protections than there are today. Local governments can only increase protections for conservation.
I've got another question right here. We are, for our listeners out there, we're Pensacola Speaks on News Talk 1370 WCOA. We've got town hall meeting with Matt Gaetz. We got our last 15 minutes.
Good evening, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
My name is Bruce Herman, Commander U.S. Navy, retired. Proudly served active duty for 33 years. On August 4th of this year, I made contact with Senator Nelson, Senator Rubio, and yourself on each of your respective websites. I received a reply from Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio, and in fact engaged in a follow-on email exchange with a member of Senator Rubio's staff who had contacted me. To date, I have not received a reply from you or your staff. The subject of my contact with our two senators and yourself was national and/or congressional recognition for our Operation Rolling Thunder Warriors. Thousands of Air Force and Navy pilots and a few Marines who alone carried the Vietnam War to the heartland of our enemy fought a fierce fight for more than 3 years in Operation Rolling Thunder. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, or actually over the past year and next year. Operation Rolling Thunder was the air offensive conducted by the Air Forces of the United States, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, against economic and military targets in North Vietnam in support of ground operations and the fighting in South Vietnam. The Rolling Thunder air campaign against the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, North Vietnam, was conducted from 2 March 1965 until 2 November 1968. The May to October 1967 period took a heavy toll on the Rolling Thunder warriors who pounded the enemy where he lived, the Red River Valley. It was an historic struggle deserving of a permanent place in American military history. That is not happening. The Congress is letting the opportunity, a fleeting opportunity, to recognize a cadre of warriors second to none in courage and fighting spirit, and especially those brothers in arms who died in that air war and have missed the decades of freedom and life that those who came home have enjoyed. As a matter of fact, this past August 26th was the 50th anniversary of Fort Walton Beach's favorite son, Colonel, then Major, George Everett Bud Day's incredible adventure in North Vietnam during Operation Rolling Thunder. This gallant Medal of Honor action is emblematic of the bravery and toughness exhibited by our Rolling Thunder warriors, now in their 80s, deserving of special recognition by our great nation. So far, the 50th anniversary mark has been bypassed and largely ignored by our government, our fathers in the Pentagon, and the Brotherhood of Military Aviation Organizations. What is being done to ensure Operation Rolling Thunder is accorded a permanent place of honor in the museums of our nation? Who is going to get Congress to pause and say something to a generation of warriors most Americans know nothing about? Americans think Rolling Thunder is the name of a motorcycle group that supports POWs and MIAs as a reason for being, but have no idea who most of these POWs and MIAs are. Do you have the chutzpah to carry the message to the White House and Capitol Hill? Who advocates for a presidential or congressional proclamation? Who strikes the commemorative medals? Who crusades for an Operation Rolling Thunder postage stamp? The time is now for Congress to recognize these ancient warriors before they are no longer with us. Remembering Operation Thunder is to remember the incredible, sustained courage of a cadre of aviators who were an elite force of courageous, skilled, disciplined, and loyal fighters imbued with the spirit of attack, born in an exceedingly brave heart. Surely this great chapter in military history is worthy of celebration and little recognition for the generation of old warriors who carried the Vietnam War into the heartland of the enemy. In fact, a good argument can be made that Rolling Thunder and our bombing of North Vietnam was the only significant offensive action of the decade-plus conflict. Thank you, Congressman. I look forward to you championing this.
Thank you for your service. we'll make sure that we correct that immediately. I will look forward to hearing from you who in the Senate offices you worked with, because typically when you've got the House and Senate rowing in the same direction on something like this, it makes it easier to elevate it to the level of the White House. But I'm familiar with the mission. I'm particularly familiar with Bud Day. He was a mentor of mine prior to his passing, and I'm still very close with his widow, Doris. And actually, Colonel Day was one of the first folks who encouraged me to seek public office back in 2009 and endorsed my first campaign. And so I'll work with you on it. I'll work with the staff members in Senator Rubio and Nelson's office. In your remarks, you asked who is responsible for these things. There's actually a subcommittee of the VA committee that does memorial and recognition work. Congressman Miller is a former chairman of that subcommittee. And so I'll also reach out to him with your permission for any guidance he may have about how to facilitate it, because it sounds as though time is of the essence. So I appreciate the question and the suggestion.
All right, we've got another question. Don, got another question? Sorry. You don't get to quit yet.
Thank you. I appreciate you holding this meeting. It's very good to be able to get input and be able to ask some direct questions. I was born and raised here in Pensacola, grew up a staunch Republican. I've lived in various places in the country, New Orleans, Dallas, Fort Lauderdale, and returned home for my retirement. I was very politically active in some of the communities that I lived in. I even run for U.S. Congress myself as a Republican. But I have reneged on all of those past associations in the last few years. I'd like to, and I'm a Democrat, proud. A moment ago you were discussing the tax the plan to reduce corporate taxes and how that's so important to compete globally. And that is the Republican argument, and it has been for a long time, that in order to compete globally, we must reduce corporate tax rates. Well, that sounds reasonable, but the corollary and the obvious parallel to that thought would, in my opinion, would be that we must also lower wages to compete globally. And in observation and in the statistics of years and years, that's exactly what's been happening, slowly but directly. And I don't think the Republicans are going to survive in this country or in any country if they came right out and explain the whole program, not only to reduce corporate tax rates, but to keep those wages down and even lower them as it relates to the cost of living index and so forth. So you're on the wrong side, Mr.
Thank you for being here and describing your political journey. I'm sorry that your campaign for Congress was not successful. I will say that when it comes to the question of wages, I don't believe that the only way for America to compete is to go to the lowest common denominator on wages. I think that we've got to find areas where Americans have unique core competencies and to be able to compete in those areas that are high wage. One area would be information technology. Right now, because of our high corporate tax rates, when people develop intellectual property in the area of information technology, they offshore those intellectual property assets. So that means we don't get the benefit of it here in the United States. It doesn't create jobs here. It doesn't create wage growth here. And so if we want to isolate those areas where we've got high-paying, clean jobs, they'll exist somewhere. If we keep our tax rate where it is now, we will continue on a trajectory of offshoring high-quality jobs. I want to inshore those jobs. I want to put America first, and the best way to do that is to have a competitive corporate tax rate so that you get career opportunities, wage growth, and more jobs being created in the United States, not in other countries that beat us on tax rates.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes left. If someone has any questions yet? Ma'am, back there by the big light bulb. Don, we still have you?
Yeah, just one moment.
All right, just a second. We are Pensacola Speaks on News Talk, 1370 WCOA. I'm Rick Gaetz with Matt Gaetz, Town Hall Meeting.
Sorry, just checking our timing, a little less than 3 minutes of radio time.
Okay, hi, thanks for being here and confronting us all. And I just wanted to say that there's not a question that's been asked tonight that has not touched on me, and I'm sure all of us in the audience are the same here. No matter what the topic was, it affects either me or a family member or someone I really care about. I just want to put out there that I am an archaeologist as well as my husband. We both work here in Pensacola, one in private sector and one in the university environment. I just have a hard time discussing sometimes with lifelong Republicans the fact that, in fact, regulation spurs industry and capitalism grows because of well-thought-out, well-placed regulations that benefit all of us in society. Before I got here, I looked online to make sure my number was right, and currently there are 24 private firms that do nothing but archaeology in the state of Florida. The laws that control my industry specifically are part of the Department of Interior, which controls also all the environmental laws. We're rolled into that. There are almost 2,000 working archaeologists outside the university setting in Florida working. These are middle-class jobs that we worked hard to get, and we pay back student loans every month to get them. So I'd just like to come in to any discussion about regulation by pointing out how many jobs all around us that benefit us. And we especially know this here in Pensacola because of our beautiful environment and cultural history that we value so much here, that regulation does indeed spur capitalism. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback.
2 minutes left. Okay, before we got 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes, right?
All right. So we got one more question. Please make it quick so we can get this all on the air.
No, I'm used to holding the mic. Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm new to the area, and I just wanted to tell you that we've been getting petitions signed. I just want you to know how the people feel about the beach situation. Number one, most of the people we spoke to, we've got over 14,000 petitions signed and waived on it, and that's why it's never going to pass the Senate. And most of the people we spoke to didn't know anything about it before. It passed Congress, and then they found out about it, and they're learning from us. So I think we want a referendum so the people of Escambia County could vote on it. And I think that's important. Would you support that?
What would be the legal mechanism you would use to call a referendum? Because as a member of Congress, I don't have the legal authority to tell David Stafford to put a question on the ballot, and David Stafford doesn't have the authority to put any question seats on the ballot. So in some jurisdictions and in some states, they actually have a process by which the citizens can put an issue on the ballot. Are you aware of such a system here?
No.
I'm not either.
I think the county commission can do it.
Oh, well, yeah, if the county commission wanted to do that, I'd have no objection at all.
All right. Let me interrupt here and let Congressman Gaetz close out the town hall meeting on the radio. Congressman, if you would like to continue, that's just fine. But we want to thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. Agree or disagree, you have to admit that he's here and he is making himself available. Congressman, you can close it out.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to thank our honorary seconds, WCOA. I want to thank Rick. And I just want to thank all the folks who took time out of your evening to come and spend it with me and with my staff, and look forward to representing you in the future and working with you on the issues that impact your quality of life. Thank you all so much.
Good night.
Yeah.